Hello, I'm Penny. I am a professor at UCL. Also, I am also a clinical psychologist. So I come from a kind of clinical and an academic background, and I'm going to talk about a piece of work that we've been doing over the last, actually it's a long time, many years. I work with Jill. We've done this together. And recently we've had the results of our study. So I'll be talking about the work we've been doing, and a bit more broadly talking about sleep in dementia, which I think is probably a massive issue here. And just generally, I think we all know what it's like when we've not had a good night's sleep. So, right, so this is just to thank our funder. So I'm funded by the NIHR, and there's lots of people that have made the projects I'm talking about happen, and lots of different universities involved. So thank you to all of them. So why is this important? So what we know is that sleep problems are very common in people living with dementia, and that's any type of dementia. Okay, so 40% of people living with Alzheimer's disease will have sleep problems. We know it's even higher in people who have dementia with Lewy bodies, so that rate goes up even further. And what we're talking about is lots of different things. So we're talking about waking up in the night, possibly waking up distressed or confused in the night. We're talking about difficulty getting to sleep, difficulty staying asleep, waking up very early in the morning, sleeping a lot during the day as well. So it's also about sleeping too much. And there's lots of behavioural changes that we can see when people wake up. We also know that it's really distressing for people when they're not sleeping, and it can make things worse for them during the day as well. We all know what it feels like when we've been awake in the night and then have to kind of carry on doing the things we're doing. So it can make you more confused, it can make you more grumpy, all of those things. And it's also distressing and difficult for people who are supporting them. So sleep problems are often the thing that lead to family members who are supporting a relative not being able to keep going. You know, it predicts carer depression, feelings of being overwhelmed or burdened, and often it's the thing that leads to a transition to a care home. And I think it's also just worth acknowledging that's often because getting care at home right, particularly when we need someone with us all through the night, is a very difficult and expensive thing. So often it's a kind of, and just to sort of speak to the discussions we've had this morning, which have been really interesting. You know, sleep is not an isolated thing, is it? It's very much linked to kind of what happens during the night. You know, so many of the people we're supporting will also need to go to the toilet during the night, or wake up with continence related issues, pain, all the other things that are going on for people. And all the reasons why you wouldn't sleep when you don't have dementia are still there. So there's lots of very complicated factors interacting. I didn't realise I was about to go on and say this. Anyway, well, that's good. So we know pain, anxiety, medication, things about your environment. You know, there's lots going on there. I won't go too much into actually what's happening, but in dementia, there is particular neurodegeneration that happens in particular bits of your brain, which mean that your circadian rhythms, so the thing that kind of tell you that it's day or it's night, that can get disruptive. So that's why you often see, that kind of day-night reversal, or people, waking up in the middle of the night and thinking they need to get up and go to work. So there's a specific disruption to circadian rhythm. And then we also see the other thing that happens with sleep is that it's a bit like being hungry. Your pressure, your need to go to sleep increases during the day. So So actually, if you are not moving very much or you're napping a lot during the day, then you don't have that kind of sleep pressure at bedtime. So that's also something that we think happens a lot in people with dementia. Happens for all of us, but those are some of the things that kind of might be going on. In terms of what works, we also know that there is not great evidence base around medication. Okay, so we know that things like antipsychotic medications, benzodiazepines, they're used a lot. I'm sure you know, used a lot in care homes as well. But actually, they have a lot of side effects. They're quite dangerous. They can increase mortality and lots of other problems for older people. And there isn't really any full good evidence that that medication works, basically, in this context. And NICE guidelines are very clear around things like, not prescribing melatonin. So even though it's often used, there isn't really a good evidence to suggest that it works for people with dementia. There's also not very much evidence that, until now, from some big randomized control trials, that the sort of non-pharmacological or more psychosocial interventions work. It doesn't mean they don't work, it's just that there hasn't been good evidence. And having really good evidence to kind of take to commissioners and argue for the need to use these things in resource-strapped environments is really, really important. So we need to have this kind of strong research to kind of go to people and be like, actually, we can save this amount of money, we need to be doing this. So there is promising evidence from multi-component interventions. So when I say that, I suppose what I mean is interventions which bring lots of different things together. So using natural light, because often people with dementia won't get outside at all. It's really good to increase light because that tells your brain when you should be asleep or awake. And we use artificial light as well, like those very bright light boxes that we give out to people. But it's combined with lots of other things. So it's really important to kind of have interventions that bring lots of things together. Okay, so I think I'm talking quite slowly, but actually, just to say, what we've done is tried to not reinvent the wheel. We've brought together people with lived experience, experts in sleep, experts in dementia, and all the available evidence, and thought, okay, let's come up with something that we can actually use in the NHS or in different community settings. And we developed something called Dream Start, which stands for Dementia-Related Manual for Sleep Strategies for Relative. And initially we did a little test. We did a feasibility trial with a small number of people just to see, can it be done and do people like it? And yes, it can be done. So we did our initial trial. I won't go into that. That was we finished in like 2017 before the pandemic. And people liked it. We were able to do it, and we were able to kind of test it as well. So we went on to do this kind of full study. And this is just a slide showing you what Dream Start involves. So what different parts of the component there are. So it's a manualised intervention, which is important because it means it can be replicated. So we have a manual that people can follow when they're delivered it. But it's personalised. So we set specific goals, we work out what specific sleep problems people have, and we kind of tailor it to people with dementia's individual needs. So that's quite important. There's 6 one-hour sessions. So I can't do left and right, but on that side, that's what a page of the manual looks like. So we don't just give people a manual, it's facilitated. So you're sat with a person who will work through the exercises and it's delivered to family carers who then try and implement strategies for people with dementia. So people with dementia can join the sessions if they're able to, but we deliver it to family carers. So it's kind of supporting family carers to make changes. We do a lot about sleep hygiene. We increase activity and exercise during the day. We use natural and artificial light, and we incorporate a lot around carers looking after their own sleep as well. So it's about supporting the people with dementia to have better sleep patterns, but it's also about supporting the people supporting them to sort of cope with the difficulties that having someone waking you up at night can bring. And it's very practical, and you kind of make an action plan each week and you work through it. The other thing I should say is that it's not delivered by clinicians, so it's delivered by non-clinically trained, usually graduates. And again, that's so that we had something which is scalable within, say, an NHS context, so that we, you know, that it's not as expensive to deliver. So people have to have training and supervision by, say, a qualified clinical psychologist like me, but it doesn't have to be delivered by a clinician. So we did a big trial, a multi-centre parallel arm superiority randomised control trial with master outcome assessment. So what I mean is we got lots of people in, we randomly allocated them into two groups, people who had the intervention and their usual NHS care, and then people who just had their usual NHS care. And we had very broad inclusion criteria. I'm not going to go through everything, but it was broad. We had people with any type of dementia who were living at home in the community. So I apologise, it's not a study that's been done in care homes, but we can talk about that. But it's people who had someone with them at night for practical reasons, because it's all about implementing strategies. And it also had to be people where they or their family members felt there was a sleep problem. So again, it's a very pragmatic study. Yeah, we didn't really exclude very many people unless they had a sort of another obvious type of sleep breathing disorder, or they were drinking heavily, because I think that's a kind of different type of sleep issue. So I've said a little bit about how we did it, but really we were interested in whether the people who had the Dream Start intervention did better on something called the Sleep Disorders Inventory, the SDI, which is a questionnaire that carers fill in about their relative sleep after 8 months. So the intervention takes about 4 months to deliver if it's every 1 to 2 weeks. So we looked at people after 4 months, but we wanted to see whether that effect was sustained after 8 months. And we looked at lots of different things. We looked at people's quality of life, the carer and the person living with dementia. We looked at their neuropsychiatric or sort of behavioural issues that the person with dementia might display. And we collected lots of information about the carer's mood and burden as well. And we have done a full cost effectiveness analysis. So obviously this stuff's really important, but it's really important whether it saves money, right? And so we've done all of that. I'm not going to go into the detail of that today, but we have also done that whole analysis, because that's the thing we need to take to ICBs and sort of say, you know, this is really important. And we've also done a lot of qualitative work looking at how it works, how it didn't work, which strategies are better, why, how you get people to change other people's behaviour indirectly, that kind of thing. I won't go through this in detail, possibly because I haven't worn my glasses. I actually can't read the numbers. But we had, so I have to do it from memory, we had 377 dyads of people with dementia and their family caregiver who took part. And the important thing from our perspective as researchers, so half got the intervention, half didn't. The important thing for us is that there's a couple of things that are important. If you look at the bottom where it says 93 or 90% were included in the primary analysis. So we were able to keep people in the study, and we did this during the pandemic. So, I mean, it was really hard. So we're very pleased with that, because actually it sort of makes your findings a bit more robust. And the other thing that we're pleased with is that often when you do trials, particularly in dementia, but actually all sorts of trials, you don't end up with a very diverse sample, because the people who end up taking part in research are often people who have more access to services. But actually what we found was that we had a very diverse sample in terms of ethnicity, and also in terms of people's educational background and sort of socioeconomic status related to that. So actually we were quite pleased with that. We also found that we were able to deliver the intervention well. So 83% of people had 4 or more of the 6 sessions. It wasn't easy, because actually, for lots of reasons, because we were doing this in the NHS across 12 different sites across England, we had to train loads of people. Me and Jill had to train loads of people. We trained 75 people to deliver the intervention. 49 of whom went on to do it. So you can imagine, like, I'm quite controlling. We didn't have that much control over how they were actually doing it, but we recorded the session so that we could listen to them. And actually what we found is that they stuck to the manual and they delivered it well. So that is a relief. The other thing we had to do was entirely change everything we were doing because of the pandemic. So when we first tested this, it was all face-to-face in people's homes or, you know, wherever they wanted to meet. Obviously, we couldn't do that during the pandemic, so we were very flexible. So you can see here that there was a real mix. So we managed to do 43% were face-to-face of the intervention sessions, but we also did some just by video, some by telephone, and some were a kind of mixture. And what we did find is that our findings didn't change depending on how it was delivered. So again, that flexibility is really, really important with family carers as well. We wouldn't have probably done it like that before the pandemic, but actually what it shows us is that that's quite a good thing to do. So we delivered it as we wanted to, people stuck to the intervention. And so in terms of what we actually found, so sorry to have a big graph staring at you in your face with lots of numbers on it. But basically, what you're looking at here, so the blue line is the usual treatment group, the people who didn't have the intervention, and the red line is the people who had Dream Start. And this is the SDI score at the beginning. So you can see, if you look at it, both groups got better at both time points. So actually, we found that the reported sleep disturbance got better across both groups. But what you can see, so that middle line is 4 months, and this line here is the 8 month. And you can see those sort of bars either side of the dots, they don't overlap. That's a significant difference between the groups at the 2 time points. So actually what we found was that, it was a 4.7 point difference on the scale, but it was a statistically significant difference for the people who had the intervention. So it did better. The people who had Dream Start had better sleep at 4 months and at 8 months compared to the people who didn't have the intervention. And actually that number, which is a bit meaningless, it exceeds what you would see as a kind of clinically meaningful difference. So the difference we got between the groups at 8 months is more than what you would expect. And it's in line with what would be a meaningful difference for people. So we were very pleased about this. Our primary outcome, we saw that sleep improved in people living with dementia. We also found, we were measuring lots of things, but in terms of the other positive effects we found that the MPI, so the neuropsychiatric symptoms, were also significantly lower in people with dementia after the intervention, and carers' sleep and anxiety were also improved. So carers reported significantly better sleep and significantly reduced anxiety in the people who'd had the intervention versus the people who didn't. So the other measures we took, they all kind of went in the right direction. So quality of life, all of those things, burden, they went in the right direction, but they weren't significantly improved. But what we saw was an improvement in sleep for the carers and the people living with dementia, and a reduction in carer anxiety. Actually, I have no hope in being able to read this. So in terms of how it worked, I will let you have a look at this, but we were interested in kind of what are the things that made the difference? What are the things that help people to change their behaviour? So I've got a couple of quotes here looking at different things. So when people intended to change, when people kind of, I suppose, set a goal in the sessions and thought, I'm going to try this out, and then saw the effect, that made a real difference to people. So let me try and read this. The effective part was that I think you had to write down what you'd done. It makes you think a little bit more about it. So you're given an incentive to plan, to make sure you implement it and talk about it the following time you had that Zoom call. So it's not just about sort of making a plan and trying things out, but it's also being able to have that therapeutic interaction with someone, to have someone you can come back to, and talk about how it went and what worked. But you also saw like an increase in knowledge, so people understood sleep a bit better, and particularly their relative sleep, okay? So the specific things that might be going on for them in the family. So this is about kind of, you know, getting out into fresh air and natural light. And then also the kind of social aspect of it, as I said, you know, having a facilitator that you can talk to. Just, I won't go into too much detail about all of this, but it was also about increasing that sleep pressure, the need to get to sleep, and developing skills to manage the sleep disturbance. So the stuff about sort of beliefs about consequences, behavioural regulation, it's seeing things work in practice, but actually importantly, those skills, developing routines, strengthening the relationship between bed and sleep, for example, was a really key thing, but also being able to sort of move people's bedtime slightly, or just make small changes which carers could then see were having a real effect on people's sleep were important too. Having a sense of control over what's happening, you know, so actually when you establish that sense of routine, you get a sense of optimism, right? You get that sense of, you know, this person, we had a focus, both of us, that he had something to do and I would support him in that. I think it put something positive into the mix. It was all so good. We were doing this and it was helping. It was working. He was starting to sleep better again. So that was really good. So I think people talk to us about feeling less tired, obviously. But it sounds really obvious. But actually that's really important, because people could think they had this sort of reflective space. They could try things out, but then they saw the benefits. So that was also something that was important. So I'm going to finish because I think I'm running out of time. But basically, these are the things, you know, we're really pleased with how this went. It was successfully delivered as we'd intended. We saw this sustained effect. And actually, there's nothing else like this. What I was trying to say at the beginning, I don't know if I actually said it, is that there is no full randomized control trial evidence of an intervention like this up until now. So this is really important. Although Jill just showed me someone had written a blog about how it basically doesn't work for some students, but they don't realise that Jill is actually leading their seminar later this afternoon, and she'll be like, oh, well, that's really interesting that you concluded that. But anyway. So good luck to them. So it works. It's you know, it doesn't solve everything. You know, those are not massive changes, but it makes a small difference to people's lives and to carers' lives. It is cost saving and moderately cost effective, but not going to talk about that today. And it has been published, and this QR code should work, but I set it up. So I apologise if it takes you somewhere bad. But that should take you to our paper, which you can read. And let's just leave it there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rapaport. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. My name's Judith Silver, and my mother was in Nightingale House for 4 years and died recently in August of this year. I've got two related questions. One is, what are the prospects of scaling this up? Because it's all very well to do many, many hours training and targeted intervention and sort of a high-tech approach, but what are the prospects for doing this more widely? And the second thing is, old people tend to have difficulty in sleeping, even if they haven't been diagnosed with dementia. And I mean, have you any comments to make about that? And you know, is it generalisable to elderly people? Could you use it with other elderly people who don't have a dementia diagnosis?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you for both those questions. I mean, this question about whether we can scale up our research is the thing that kind of keeps me, Jill, you know, keeps us up at night, because actually, you have to start by testing something in quite a kind of controlled, rigorous way, don't you? We are quite hopeful that this is scalable for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's quite cheap, relatively cheap to deliver. Now that, obviously it all depends on kind of whether there's any resource available, doesn't it? But actually we've got something where we can deliver the training remotely to the facilitators quite easily. We don't need fully qualified clinical staff to do it. And actually we've got other interventions that we've done where we have a sort of successful model for sort of training and scaling up. The really important thing is that we've got the data on the cost as well and the potential. So what we found was that people who were in the intervention group use less services. So actually being able to go to the people with a bit of money and say, this is really important. So we've got the package, we've got, we make all our materials freely available. I mean, I think whether things ever get used, unfortunately, it's really difficult because actually what you do see is resource going into things that don't work as well. Because they're cheaper, and so all we can do is really try and make packages. That's why we do all this qualitative work as well, because we really want to be able to say to people, look, try this. And we're doing more stuff. I missed my last slide, but we're sort of trying to kind of already do implementation studies to sort of scale it up, to look about how it can be used in different contexts for different populations. So we're working on it, and we think that it is scalable, because actually just say giving someone a manual and saying, work through this on your own just doesn't work. So what you find is it's great to do that because it's easy, but it doesn't work. In terms of just other populations, I think with older people, there, this intervention is kind of built on what we knew already worked with older people. So yes, I mean, I think there's lots out there, lots of the stuff that's available through NHS services to treat insomnia or sleep problems will also work for older people. So yes, I mean, it would apply, but there's a lot in there that's kind of quite dementia specific as well. So, but yeah, there's no reason why. When my 10-year-old, a long time ago when we were developing it, was having problems sleeping, I gave him the manual and he kind of went through it. It was like, it's great, but there's a lot of pictures of old people in it. I was like, yeah, I know. But yeah, so yes, I think there's a lot in there which can be applied.
Hi, Finn Turner-Berry from the National Care Forum. I just wanted to ask, in terms of ethics and kind of squaring off personal choice and autonomy with kind of the requirements for the intervention.
Yeah.
How does that really factor into things? So like keeping up people after meals, for example, I guess in the learning disability and autism space, you'd say, go to bed when you want, wake up when you want, it's your choice, it's your life. How do you kind of square those things when developing an RCT and an intervention? Yeah,
I mean, it's really challenging, isn't it? When you're doing any research with people living with dementia, that, obviously we went through a whole ethical process and we've worked with people with dementia all the way through. And anyone who takes part either gives informed consent or a consultee will do that on their behalf. So from a sort of research ethics perspective, I think we're kind of okay. I mean, I think that the sort of more complicated thing is that what we're doing is asking family members to sort of implement changes, and that's quite hard. And I think that's where the kind of facilitator comes in. So it's having someone to work with you to think about, like, well, how could you do that in a way which fits with what they would want? We're not saying if someone's always, gone to bed really late. Like we had someone in the trial who I think was watching 3 movies through the night. That was what gave them quite a lot of pleasure, but equally it was really disruptive for them. So it was working with the family members to try and change that. And obviously if the person with dementia can join the sessions, we would invite them, but what we don't do is have them there if it's going to cause them distress or it's going to be confusing for them. So I think, there are ethical dilemmas related, but I think it would, those conversations would always be based on, what would this person have wanted? And actually, is it going to reduce things like the risk of falls or other things happening because they're kind of getting up in the night and it's quite dangerous? So I suppose it's slightly different as well from, say, an autism or intellectual disabilities setting. But yeah. Oh, Jill, did you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to add something if I could, and then give it back to you.
Yeah, sorry, she's
Thank
allowed.
you. Yeah, because somebody asked me, I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago at the Royal College of Psychiatrists, if you could only do one thing, what would it be? And I thought it was people falling asleep during the day, but you don't wake them up. What we tried to do was to identify when they fell asleep and give them something more interesting to do. And I think that was really helpful. Most of them, but not all of them, fell asleep after lunch. So what would happen is they'd have lunch and the person their family member would get up to clear up lunch and stuff, and they would fall asleep, and their family member would think, well, at least I get to clear up and I'm so exhausted, so they would just leave it. But when we started and got people to say, so immediately after lunch, they would often go for a walk, and they liked it, or they would do a jigsaw. I mean, lots of people can't walk, or they would do something, but that was sort of transformative for many people, because often people fall asleep, they're a bit tired, but they've got nothing better to do. So, I mean, I think it isn't, I mean, I don't like people waking me up, so I don't see why people with dementia should like people waking them up. So I don't think that's a great way to go about it, just go and bother them whenever they fall asleep. But I think if we can prevent them falling asleep, because I don't think people are making an informed decision. They're not thinking, I'll sleep now and not be able to sleep at night. They're just sleeping now because they are.
Thank you. That was really impactful, I think, and quite a lot sort of affecting quality of life of the residents. I saw you said you were not going to talk about it, but you've done the economic modelling and it works. Can I get my head around it? It works despite the fact that your treatment as usual group also improved. Didn't improve as much as your intervention group. So if that wouldn't have happened, it would have really worked. Do you know why the treatment as usual group improved? Do you have any idea?
I think generally people do better if they're in a research trial. So I think that what we're seeing is people having additional attention, even the measures that we're taking, I haven't talked about it today, but, people wore a wrist-worn device, there was lots of things happening. And so we saw a sort of general improvement over time. But I suppose the important thing is the difference between, but also interestingly, I won't go into the cost effectiveness stuff, but what we didn't find was a difference in the EQ5D between the groups. Okay, so so there was no difference in quality of life between the groups, but the costs came down. So in terms of how it's measured, it still comes out as kind of moderately cost effective. But it's really hard to measure these things as well, isn't it? So, and also I didn't say, but we didn't have like an objective measure of sleep. We weren't using those devices to measure people's actual sleep as an outcome. We were using it to inform the intervention. So we used the data from that to help people develop personalised strategies. Anyway,
The question here from online. Friederike is asking if this could be delivered through other charities as an online program, through, for example, Dementia Cares Count.
So one of the things that we'll go on to do is look at, with our other intervention, which is called START, which is for family carers. We have a model where it's delivered in third sector organisations, and we can sort of staff can be trained and supported to deliver. What I would say is that for now, the important thing is that it isn't a group intervention, okay? So it is a facilitated intervention. So we also know that interventions that are just purely remote, so people maybe follow an online, work package or something, generally don't work as well. So yes, it can be, we hope that it will be picked up broadly, and if anyone wants to hear more, they should get in touch with us. But it is something that we hope will be delivered in a kind of one-to-one way initially, because actually you get that personalisation, which I think is really important. And we'll also be looking at how this could fit in care home settings. Obviously, that was what my last. It's very, very different, I think, sleep in care homes. But we will be looking to kind of think about how something like this would fit. Thank you.